One of the first sermons I preached at this church was from Jeremiah. Jeremiah is one of those prophets that we know best. We have more stories about Jeremiah, and we have more writing from him that we call upon at different times in the liturgical year than others. This happens for a few reasons. One, he started young. When Jeremiah is called, it says he didn't feel like he could do it because he was too young and he didn't know what to do. And God even tells him, don't tell me you're too young, just go do the job. And then Jeremiah lives a long life. So we have more stories from a life of prophecy and ministry from Jeremiah than others. Also, Jeremiah tells a lot of stories. If someone were to come forward and give us lots of statistics, and someone else were to come and tell us stories, we're going to remember the one who told the stories because they're easier to retell. They stick with us. The story of buying property in the face of destruction, the story of Jeremiah's call. There are stories we can look back on that can stick with us, that are easy to remember. We also know stories about him, things that happened in his life biographically that stick with us. As we read through scriptures, we hear about how kings and priests tried to discredit Jeremiah because they didn't like the message he was bringing. They thought it was too negative, and they didn't like the news. So they tried to say it was fake prophecy, if you will. Fake news in the old days. We know that he was imprisoned for speaking the truth. At one point, they put him down in a well that was a cistern in all the silt and mud that had fallen into it where he couldn't get out. And they left him there, and at night the king would come and see if he really meant the things he was saying, or if it was all just for show. We know also that Jeremiah wanted to stay in Jerusalem when the exile took place. When Babylon eventually comes in and conquers, when the prophecies are fulfilled, Jeremiah says, no, I want to stay here. I'll hide out. I'll take the risk. I'll be part of the remnant that grows up out of this place after Babylon. But his friends kidnap him and take him to Egypt for his own safety. Thus, the long life that Jeremiah lives and our ability to hear so many stories today. Jeremiah is an important prophet. He's one of many during that time in the southern kingdom. Remember in the past weeks we talked about how the kingdoms got divided. And the south falls to Assyria, which leaves Judah and its capital Jerusalem in the south. But now Babylon has conquered Assyria, and they're moving south, an even stronger power, and they're not as afraid to push forward to the well-fortified city of Jerusalem. And they don't seem as afraid of Egypt beyond. Babylon is surrounding Jerusalem during Jeremiah's lifetime. They've conquered everything else around. The next step is obvious. They're coming to Jerusalem. Jeremiah has warned them, and no one has believed it. They preferred to live in denial. They couldn't really judge the people up north for being unfaithful and falling into exile if they believed it would happen to them. It would require a change in their narrative, in the way they saw themselves. It would require some self-reflection to see their own faults, and they weren't having it. They would rather just discredit the messenger than change. They were content to let future generations deal with the consequences than make the change required. Today's story includes God as the potter. It's one of those beautiful images that Jeremiah uses, a familiar image throughout Scripture and a lot of our Christian storytelling of God as potter. It shows up in hymns and poems throughout the years. The idea of God shaping us is inspiring and comforting in some ways, but mainly, I think, because we missed the context of the prophecy. It's comforting because we missed the context of the prophecy. It's a people that don't want to change. It's a people that want to stay the same. It's a people that think they arrived generations before and that they are better than those around them. It's people who don't want anything to change and who would feel the world fall apart if it did. It can sound like a comforting image, till we remember the context. This story in some ways is a parable. It's got different layers to it. We can see ourselves as potters, being able to change the world around us, being able to change the outcome of what's happened around us, to change God's mind by our changing our behavior. But most often in this story, we see God at the potter's wheel and ourselves in the clay. Most often, we read the story with God as the potter and us as the creation from the potter's hand. So we are completed creations in the potter's hand that the potter now decides it's time to change into something else. We were a vase, but God's decided now we're going to be candlesticks. We were a bowl, and now we're going to be a chalice. We were done. We were done being made. And now God says, no, you're going to be something else. Oh no. I was just getting good at being a bowl. I was just getting good at being a mug. I was just getting used to the glaze the potter had put on me, calling me good and putting me on the shelf. Now I'm going to be something new, something else. I don't know how to do that. Imagine the fear in Jerusalem when Jeremiah says, you think you were done. You think the potter had finished shaping you, Jerusalem. You'd been in the oven. You'd come through the fires. And now the potter is going to turn you into something else. Do something new with you who thought you were done. How would you feel? How would you feel today if a messenger from God came in and said, it's time for a makeover? Covina Community Church, it's time for a makeover. Ken, it's time for a makeover. New job, new career, new place. Are you ready? Chun, time for a makeover. New wardrobe, new hair, new outfit. Whole new identity. Carmencita, time for a makeover. You're going to be the pastor, not the greeter. Can you imagine the fear in us? What would we say if God asked us to be remade clay? Scared? Angry? Unsure? What if God asked our church to be transformed? Not just to grow, not just to expand. I mean, we're okay with God changing us if it brings more people in the pews, right? We're okay if God changing us if it helps with evangelism and outreach. But what if we don't know the outcome? God just says, you're going to be different. How would we respond? Excited or worried? Freed? Curious? Afraid? Are we okay with being changed? Are we okay with being changed? Jeremiah puts this image out there as an object lesson or an ancient parable. The Aesops wrote some of our more modern parables in comparison. And one of them that doesn't get a lot of attention is the giant oak tree and the reeds. When the storms and the rains would come, the reeds would bow down to the wind, almost touching the water of the stream that went by. And the oak would laugh at them and say, look at you, weak, bending to the whims of nature around you. Stay strong like me. Be proud like me. You can't be all wishy-washy. People will push you around. And the reed said, no, we're content to bow to the wind. We're content to be flexible in the moment. And you might want to consider yourself being more flexible, for your day might come, mighty oak. The oak laughs at the reeds, and one day as a new storm rolls in, the reeds start bowing with the wind, and the oak is mocking them until the large winds come down. And the oak, in all its rigid strength, cannot stand up to the power of the wind and the rain, to the power of nature pushing against it. And the mighty oak, unwilling to yield, is uprooted and falls into the stream. The reeds, after the storm, are still the reeds, and the once mighty oak is fallen, no longer what it once was. I don't know where the second half of the story I heard came from. It's not in Aesop's originals. I've heard some credit it to Buddhist tradition. I've heard others credit it to anonymous. But the way I heard the story was, there was once a mighty tree that stood on the side of the water. It was prideful. It bragged about its strength, its beautiful limbs. It took pride in its leaves and its grandeur. But it fell into the water. But the tree was not done because it was a proud tree and a strong tree. So it fought against the current. And the more it fought, the more the river sucked it down, pulled it down to rock bottom, the rocks at the bottom of the stream, stripping away the leaves, the limbs, the branches of the once proud tree. Over and over it fought back, and the river won, stripping it down to where it was nothing but a log, a trunk. The tree gave up. It gave up to the flow of the river. It became stripped of its bark, stripped of its rough places. And slowly, as it quit fighting and was transformed, it rose up to the top of the water. It came up back to the light, and it found itself lifted on the tips of waves, lifted by the water, buoyed by the current and the wind, shooting down the river at speeds it could never have imagined, seeing places it never imagined traveling to when it was stuck, planted, rooted in all its firmness and pride on that riverbank. The now new creation made its way to the end of the river and out to the ocean, to a horizon it never imagined, and to a future it was yet to know. As people, sometimes we are strong and rigid, and eventually forced into change. Forced into change. We see it in this church family. Over the years, we have found our way into change. We have merged. We have welcomed new bodies into our community. We have revisioned who we are going to be. Within this church family, though, there are individuals who've exemplified the idea of the potter shaping us anew in powerful ways. Those who have left school or career to claim a new calling serving their family. Those who have changed paths to come to this country, leaving everything, including the progress they had made academically and professionally, behind. Others have left congregations and church families where they had deep roots and strong relationships to build something new, to start a new path in this place. Some of you have changed dramatically. Medical issues reshaping your family and your life. Job changes or career choices dramatically changing your life. Finding the courage to confront injustice in your life and leave old hurts behind. Finding the courage to face the demons that have been there and still linger in the darkness, linger in the back of our mind, and allow ourselves to be turned into something new. Being remade in the potter's hand, being born again. Born again is not a term you hear in a lot of UCC congregations. It's a term that has gotten a bad rap over the years because being born again has been used as a litmus test to whether you are in or out. Are you spiritually one of us or not? Some have made it a requirement for being a part of the faith family. Are you born again? It gets used in different amounts of language. Different language gets put in different contexts in different churches. But so often it's been used to judge rather than affirm. So many churches have run away from that terminology. Are you born again? It's not an in or out. It's a, have you been remade in the potter's hand? Or has God just slowly shifted you and evolved you over time? Have you continued to grow into one thing? Or have you found yourselves as many things in your life? Reborn and remade at different times in different chapters. It's not a term we have to be afraid of, but we need to be clear what we mean by it. We're not saying, are you one of the select few who've experienced God a particular way and allowed in? But instead, have you found that God has done something new in your life? Has God changed what you were into what you can be now? Has God transformed you? Have you been remade? Have you been reshaped in the potter's hand? It's not a term we have to be afraid of. Being born again is not something the evangelicals own. It is a word that reflects the humility of the reeds, but also the journey of the tree. It is a term that reflects the humility of the reeds, but even more so, the journey of the tree. I was this and God made me new. Surely that is good news. For those who feel they don't belong, for those who feel they're in the wrong body or living in the wrong time in history, for those who feel out of place because their world has changed and they feel stuck, rooted to a place in the midst of it. We can learn the humility of the reeds. Or, if we feel like we have fallen, if we feel like we are being sucked down and torn apart by the winds of change and life around us, we can trust in the potter's hand. We can trust in the current of the Spirit moving all around us and know it is okay. It is okay to be remade, to be born anew, to become something new in the potter's hand. Amen.